much, Yair. Of course, we have many questions. Thank you. That's a great talk. I will start asking questions myself so that people have time to reflect on everything they just heard and
I
get.
have all the time. It's only 8:15 here, and so I can stand until 8 in the evening.
Okay, great. So let me start. You know, I'm obsessed with history, and I know you are a big fan of history as well. So I was for this reason I was reading recently again your paper, the value of information in information analysis from 81, so 40 years ago. So this was even 10 years prior to the work you did with Ron Weber. So the question is, how come an atomic physicist gets interested in all this stuff, in information analysis, in the value of information, and in the ontological foundations of conceptual modeling?
How come a physicist is interested?
Yes. How did you go from being an atomic physicist doing nuclear physics to doing all that?
It's both physics. It's the way we describe the relations. And actually Bunge's ontology is trying to use modern physics to explain ontology. There are people who object to Bunge because it takes that approach. But really Bunge tries to use physics to describe systems and others in completely different areas. In his volume 4 about ontology, he talks about social systems. So again, he's trying the links that exist between items to describe what's happening. I'm not sure if I answered.
No, sure. I mean, we will get to Bunge in a minute, but I'm interested in your personal trajectory. I mean, how did you go, right, from doing nuclear physics to work in computer science and in management information systems?
Well, I did it much earlier. I started doing a PhD in physics years ago. On liquid crystals, by the way, what we use now on televisions, at the same time it didn't exist yet. And we published 1 or 2 papers, and then I said, I'm not going to do something interesting in physics, I want to do something more pragmatic. So I went and studied decision sciences, operations research in the Technion. Well, finally I found it's not very helpful either, so I moved to teaching IT. But it's still, if we are thinking about the fundamentals of IT, maybe there are some principles that can give us the more general way we look at them. And that's how we got to conceptual modeling.
Oh, indeed. I think Bunge's the Ontology 1, The Frontier of the World, and the Ontology 2, A World of Systems, are both that everyone doing conceptual modeling should read. I read them 25 years ago.
Oh, it's difficult to read. We have to admit. It's not
yeah, but they're extremely interesting.
Well, yeah, I cannot be objective.
So, by the way, talking about the Bunge and the decision to adopt it and to adapt it to do the work you did. So, I mean, I know the story, but I would like very much to get that on record. So do we own the existence of the BWW ontology to you sharing a flight from Chicago to Vancouver with Ron, and he sharing, being assigned an office right next to Richard Matasich?
Yes, that's completely correct. The correct story, we went from the ISIS conference home, not home. Ron was taking a sabbatical from Australia, from the University of Queensland, in Vancouver. So on the way, we started talking about it, and then we saw that we had very interesting issues we wanted to work on. By the way, I still don't like the BWW. There is Bunge, but somebody called it BWW, and again, I always have complaints about it.
Yeah, because Bunge wasn't involved directly, right?
Richard Matasich, who was a great philosopher of accounting at UBC, he suggested to Ron to look at Bunge. And that's how we started looking there.
Yes, that's very interesting. Mateschitz himself did some really interesting work in the 60s, right, with the simulation of the firm and so on.
When he was almost 90, he got more research grants from the government of Canada when he was almost 90. So that's very interesting proposition. He was great.
Probably because he was ahead of his time, right? When he was doing this in the 60s.
What we think, yeah.
About that, you know, one thing that I thought was quite interesting, I read when you and Ron wrote this paper reflecting on the 30 years of the publication of the first paper. One thing that I thought was quite interesting is that you mentioned that in the beginning it was really hard to publish this, and you were lucky that you had two really brave editors that wanted to go ahead and publish these papers, which were kind of not very too original for the area back then. So, I mean, I would like to ask you about the importance of going against the flow and publishing things which are original, even if you have to work hard to get them published. I saw an interview recently with Judy Pearl, and he makes this point of the importance of being a rebel in science as well and not going with the flow.
Okay, first of all, we thought that it will be relatively easy to publish in ISR. When ISR, the first or second issue of ISR, and we sent it, and two reviewers said fairly good things about it. But the associate editor of ISR hated it. So for the second round, we got another reviewer, and the reviewer said this was the worst paper he ever read. So we had two reviewers who were for. One reviewer who said it was the worst paper we ever had, and the associate editor, oh, I agree with the editor, with the reviewer, and it wasn't published in ISR. Now, at that time, we should have fought it because it was very clear, but we didn't. So we sent it to the British Journal, and Avison agreed to accept it, even though, again, one reviewer against and one was for. And that's how it was published. Now, it's not a great way to progress in ranks in North America. You have to have papers accepted. And actually, the more your papers are closer to what people did, you have a better idea of, you think it's better idea of them being accepted if it's different, but not very different. If it's major difference, then you have a problem. And that's what, but you know, we just wanted to publish what we thought we had. Since we had tenure, it wasn't that much of a problem. But normally, don't do it before you have tenure.
I see. Another thing which I thought was, I'll mention something else that I think it's very interesting in that paper. But before that, so let me just put this in a different way. One thing that I think we are doing, let's say, ontological foundations of information systems is to go through a process that is very similar to what people do in philosophy of language and linguistics do, right? So look at language and natural language utterances as a kind of window to the ontology underlying cognition. And I think that's what we do as well when we analyze the kind of structures that people have been building, trying to organize data and so on. So it's something very peculiar because there are problems that I think that only appear when designing information systems, large information systems, integrating information systems and so on. So the question goes like this. In one passage of that paper, you guys say that philosophical debates should be left to trained philosophers. I know that's Ron's opinion. I've heard that from him in the past. I guess you agree. But don't you think that we need really people that do information systems who are trained in philosophy? So trained philosophers of information systems, because there are some phenomena which are very, very peculiar of information systems.
So what do you say? Should we learn more about philosophy?
Absolutely, yes.
Well, I have a story. the late 80s, I presented in University of Vienna.
Mm-hmm.
So I mentioned bunges, bunge, and we looked at this, we looked at that. So at the end of the class, of the presentation, one person raises his hand and says, bunge is a charlatan, why did you even use it? Mm-hmm. So that's what Ron refers to. The question is, how do you know whom to study and what to study? I have a question for you, because you read more, or as much, probably more than me.
I think there are some aspects. So, for example, I mean, this is a very interesting debate that we can address also here in this conversation, right? So there are some phenomena. For example, take events. Right, so events are fundamental in information systems, and I remember this paper by Govalen and Salvatore March, in which they make this point that there is one tradition in philosophy of events in which events are transitions between states, right? That's what Bunge would say. On the other hand, you have people doing philosophy of language like Donald Davidson, for example, in which events are reified because you want to create taxonomies of events and describe properties of events.
Yeah, there's a paper in MISQ about it, I think.
Exactly. Okay. It's a very interesting paper, right? So they show empirically the importance of taking this other view of event reification. So, I mean, given a class of problems, we should look at these as tools, right? That could, for certain classes of problems, maybe different theories could be better applied or better or more adequate. But judging that requires some sort of training in philosophy, right? I think there are great things in all these different schools, but it requires some philosophical training to judge that. Wouldn't you?
Yeah, go ahead.
No, that's the question. Wouldn't you agree?
A question for you. If I wanted to teach some fundamental of philosophy without linking to more specific views of one or the other, how do I do it? I'm just asking you. You see, you don't want to link to one idea or to another. You want to give general views. How you suggest we do it?
I think people that need to work on the ontological foundation, on ontology-driven conceptual modeling, they need to have some sort of philosophy training. They need to study ontology from a philosophical point of view.
Yeah. Well, apparently people publish a lot without studying it.
Sorry?
People publish lots of papers without studying ontology.
Yes, but I mean, I think there is an important role there to be played by that. I mean,
well,
and I don't think, I mean, my original reference to philosophical debate should be left to trained philosophers is that I don't think trained philosophers can solve these problems for us because they don't understand the problems that we computer science have to address. So they're not going to do it.
Yeah, you're right. You're right. Actually, I think the way philosophers progress is by saying not very good, not agreeing with others. That's how philosophy often progresses.
Mm-hmm.
And that's not what we are looking for. We are looking for some fundamental ideas that we can use to think about conceptual modeling, I think.
Yes. So is there anything in these 30 years that you thought you got wrong? In that sense, I mean, that you thought this theory was the right thing to explain this phenomena, like events or relationships or types, that you had to revise this theory in your mind?
Whose theory?
No, I mean, for example, what do you guys propose? You and Ron propose on adapting Bunge. Is there anything there that you thought that you were wrong and you had to propose an alternative theory?
I'm just trying to think carefully. I think certain definitions that he had during his books, he sometimes changes and you don't even notice that it happens. It says one thing in one place and not completely agreeing in a different place, but maybe that's the way when he progressed. You see, what we used was very fundamental ideas. There are things They have states and there are events. And this has not changed, and that hasn't changed since then. The idea was to show what events we have in information system, what things are in information system, how to create more ideas out of it. We try to explain, like how do we explain what processes based on event and states. So we try to explain additional phenomena. That's what I will say. We try to explain more from the fundamental ideas. I'm not sure that I answered.
Oh, very good. So let me ask you a question really about the topic of today, about classification. And again, making a reference to Bunge. So this distinction between category and class reminds me of the distinction between what Bunge calls a class and what he calls a natural kind.
Yes,
right?
Yes.
But with the names kind of inverted, because a class there is just, created, a set created by an intersection of the scope of properties, and a natural kind, a scope of properties which are lawfully related, right? So it's very close to what you call a class. Would that be a correct interpretation?
Yeah, it's a correct interpretation, but I don't think he made the distinction between category and class and how to use them. He left it there, as far as I remember. Okay. It's about 2 pages in his book, and he explained the difference, and it's good, but it doesn't say, okay, what comes out of it. I'm willing to look again. Maybe I make a mistake, but
no, I think it would correspond to this distinction. Yeah. Okay, so Yair, I will move to the questions from the audience then.
Okay.
Okay, so the first question is actually kind of. Well, let me explain this question to you because you might not be aware of this. So the question.
Sorry, are you sending it to me or no?
No. I'll just read the questions.
Yeah.
So don't worry. I'll just read the questions and we discuss them. So the first question is, does the conceptualization of category in your theory has any relation to the notion of rigidity as it does in UFO? So the notion of rigidity, I don't know if you're aware of this, is a class that would apply to instance in all possible situations.
So the question is, if the person who suggested the question, does it mean rigidity is a way to define more properties, yes or no? That's the question.
Now, let me explain the question in a broader sense. So if we take this distinction, one orthogonal distinction to the one you made between classes and categories is one that would differentiate classes and categories, so classifiers, let's call them, that apply to things essentially or contingently, right? So the difference between being a person and being a professor or being a student.
Yeah.
So the question is category, in your approach, rigid, essential in this sense, or you don't make this distinction between classes that apply to things?
I don't make the distinction.
Okay, and you don't think that's an important distinction?
For which purpose? What am I trying to gain by doing this?
So, for example, differentiating between what you call classes and roles, for example, between being a person and being a student?
Being a person, being a student, no, I don't make a distinction.
Okay. I'll move to the next question then. How do we apply this approach to the so-called social science?
The answer is, if we have in social sciences a category, a group of things for which we use similar properties, we can ask, even within this category, there is some ways to infer or not. For example, social classification in terms of what you belong to. Maybe if we know what you belong to, we know additional things that we don't. We can infer additional things. So the question is, does social sciences infer additional compared to just being a member of a class. You see, do we know more by putting something in a category?
So
you see what I'm saying?
Yes, yes. So
maybe if the person could provide an example, we can discuss it.
Okay, I think there are other questions that refer to this question, so maybe it will become even more clear, right? So the next question is, your introduction of the triple phenomenon attributes category is currently cyclic. Phenomenon needs attributes, attributes form a category for which a phenomenon exists. Can we use a kind of layered definition?
I disagree. I think that things precede the predicates. However, without the predicates, you cannot describe the things. In other words, I don't think it's cyclical. I think things, what I call things, could be processes, winds, whatever. You have the idea and then you attach predicates. I don't reverse it in my view.
Okay. So the next question actually makes a reference to the question before, right? The one about social science.
Yeah.
You show us how the science connection of classification may help to better understand scientific progress. Could a social science connection of classification help to better understand human knowledge and to better guide AI progress in terms of the right representation of knowledge?
The other is if you can define some ways to infer additional properties, yes. But he should tell me. I do not know about social sciences enough. But if you can say, by being a member of a certain class, we have additional properties we can attach to you, yeah, you can use it in social sciences.
Why the starting introduction of airplane as a class does not have inferences? It seems that the word airplane carries already a lexical semantics that allows already inferences.
Of course, but I started with a very simple and say, if there is more interesting stuff, we'll add it and it will become a class. Of course, we have no argument. If somebody could have started with more properties, then the class will be there. But I started with very simple to show how by adding, we make it a class.
Okay. So, I mean, there is a comment. I'll just identify the person in this case. This is Oscar. Oscar was here with us, Oscar Pastor, and he mentioned the influence of your work on his work. So he says, thanks for the fantastic talk. You never change, always acting as a source of original ideas and wise knowledge. So this is from Oscar. Oscar commented on the importance of this work, especially on events for his work. And then I'm talking about Oscar because I asked him this question, so I'll ask you this question as well. I remember, I know Oscar is a big fan of the Frisco report, right? And the work was done there. You were involved in Frisco in the beginning, right?
Yes. How do you know everything about me?
Again, I'm obsessed with history.
Yeah, I was involved, not a direct Frisco member, but a person who reads it and makes comments. Yeah, in 1989.
That was a very interesting work, right? What they did there. Do you think we need some sort of Frisco 2.0?
Frisco for what?
A second version of Frisco.
You know, who will be members? Who will decide? I'm just asking a question.
So, I mean, do you think that there are, so what in you, I'll put a different question. I'll put the question differently then. What do you think are the missing gaps, the holes that we still have to develop in the ontological foundations of information systems?
Tough question. Can I think about it for a moment?
Yeah. So let me continue the question because we have many students here, right? We have many students attending this talk. So okay. What would you recommend as an interesting PhD topic, for example, in this area of foundations of information systems?
Actually, I'm going to suggest something maybe a little bit different, not different, thinking differently. We did discuss ontology in conceptual modeling. However, we would like to take it down to the design and show it can really help us develop data and organize data in different ways that will allow us to access data in ways that we didn't do before. So can we move it from conceptual to design level and show how it can work? You see what I'm saying?
Yes, yes. I mean, that's of course very, very important, right? Find ways to translate from the conceptual, from this ontology-driven conceptual models to actual implementations, and show that this would have an impact on the implementations of.
Yeah, think about the relational model. We have classes. Now, maybe by looking at different principles, we can change the classes and do some different ways, like you can create the classification only when you need them, not originally, because in organization it's generated originally, but usually by database designer. And we don't want to do it because we get new data all the time. How can we do it, for example?
There is another comment here which says, symmetric questions, whether philosophy needs to study IS before they can make a useful contribution. So that's what I was saying, right? That in order for philosophers to actually make a contribution to computer science, they should know much more about computer science.
They should know more about computer science, about any. If they do it in social studies, they have to understand more. That's very clear.
Yeah. It's like when people do philosophy of physics, for example, right?
Yeah, you have to understand some physics.
Yes. So again, back to social science. So the issue of social science is that there are no hard laws that can infer additional properties in the same way as physical laws. At best, one could have probabilistic inference.
Yeah, go ahead. Yeah.
No, I guess that's the point, right? That social laws are not laws in the same way as physical laws. And if that would have any impact in your distinction.
First of all, some social laws are. If you are a member, if you are a citizen of a country or not, there are very clear rules about it. So some of them do exist. Mm-hmm. But of course, if you know that some laws are just assumed, you have to see, and here is the interesting way to think about it. You have to see what comes out of it. Then you have to test it. If you cannot test what comes out of it, then you haven't learned much. If you can test it and it works in most of the cases, then it works for you. Mm-hmm. But you have to test it. And you can't just say it. Say it is not enough.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so let me ask you, so this is again, I think I went through all the questions from the audience. I still have some questions myself. Let me ask you one which is related to the point you just made. So the quote I made in the beginning from this paper that you wrote with Ron in the 1990s. So this was the IEEE transaction paper. You make a point that with which I fully agree, that it's very similar to a point that Bunge himself makes in the end of the introduction of the Ontology 1, which is this idea that every science presupposes a metaphysics, right? That you cannot do science without an ontology, without developing an ontology of that scientific endeavor. However, I remember that you used to say that an ontology is just a set of beliefs, no more, not less, no more, no less, right?
Yes, absolutely.
So I mean, so my question goes like this. I mean, I agree that an ontology is a set of beliefs, like any other knowledge is a set of beliefs, right? Absolutely. However, there are types of knowledge which are not empirically validated, mathematics, for example, and philosophical knowledge. So you think there are other ways to evaluate the quality of ontologies which are not empirical?
Okay, my point is, and that's a very interesting, mathematics is not sciences.
Yes.
So mathematics is a way to think logically about things, but it's not a science. So I'm not sure how I use mathematics to check ontology. I'm just asking you.
So let me make a second point then, because I mean, even the discussion on what is scientific is a philosophical discussion, not a scientific one, right? So the criteria that we use to decide if a theory is scientific is a philosophical criteria. So in a sense, again, every science presupposes some kind of metaphysics, some ontology. So we cannot, how can we, I mean, otherwise it's turtles all the way down, right? So there should be some philosophical criteria for evaluating the quality of this metaphysical work, which is not empirical, I think.
What would you use as a way to measure them? How would you do that?
For example, logical consistency. For example, how parsimonious this theory is. I'm not dispensing with the empirical work. I'm just asking for additional criteria.
Okay, so additional, yeah, maybe. I mean, of course, if parsimony is good, then you want to use parsimonies. Yeah, but is it good always? I'm just asking you a question.
No, I mean, I have no answers for that. Yeah. Just...
you may be right. I just don't know.
Yeah. Let me ask two final questions then. I noticed that you still, very recently you published a paper with Ron, I think last year or 2 years ago. So yes. This is a collaboration, a partnership that's lasting for 35 years, I guess. So
well, yeah, go ahead.
Can you say something about this? How it's been, working together for this 35 years?
Oh, we haven't worked for 35 years. For quite a few years, we haven't done anything together. Mm-hmm. And actually, this paper was rejected in 1990 or 1989. It was rejected. And again, we should have fought for it, but we didn't. Mm-hmm. And then I found it in my papers about 5 years ago, I think. And I sent it to Ron. And Ron said, let's go and publish it. And I have to say that publishing this time, it was mostly a work of Ron, not of me. Mm. Okay? I mean, we did it originally together. There was no issue. But after so many years, it was Ron who wanted to publish it and sent it to the right journal, I think. So, but we haven't worked for quite a few years. We haven't worked together, although from time to time, we had to answer questions, and there were some, like in the Scandinavian journal, we had to answer, etc. But I think from the late 90s, we didn't work that much together, although we're in good contact all the time.
Yeah, by the way, this is a very interesting special issue of the Scandinavian Journal of Information Systems, in which many people write papers, in a dialogue with the two of you about foundations of information system. Myself, Colaguarino included.
It's much nicer to read than many of the regular journal, even though the regular journal may have higher different ratings. I think the Scandinavian is more interesting in many ways.
There is another question here. How do we model mental states, for example, intentions, moral values, privacy, etc., which now have to be incorporated into information systems?
Well, can you attach some attributes to this? I'm just asking you a question.
No, I mean, this is a question from the audience, right? But I think it's also connected to this idea that some of these new information systems, for example, autonomous systems, AI systems, would require not only ontology, but ethics as well, right?
How you define ethics in this case? There is a reason I'm asking. How would you define ethics? Isn't it the connection between attributes?
Which attributes?
I'm asking. How do you measure ethics? How does it,
Yeah.
To attach some attributes to it in general. Otherwise, it's very hard to measure and to know what you're talking about.
Mm-hmm.
Although ethics is very important, there is no issue, but you have to attach something to it that we can measure or look at it. I mean, how much that is has a problem for you for people involved? Well, so we have to attach some attributes to it. Mm-hmm. It's not regular computer science attributes, but they are, I think. Maybe I'm wrong.
Yeah, I know that. So this is my final question. I mean, we could spend the whole day talking here. It would be a pleasure, but I think we have to wrap up. So my final question is, so this is a question I asked a few weeks ago to Wil van der Aalst as well. I mean, in physics and in other areas like mathematics, we have many examples of people that did very good work of, let's say, science popularization, right? By, you have famous books about very complicated stuff like string theory and cosmology and so on. And I feel that we should have more of this in computer science, right? So books that help to popularize computer science in that sense. I mean, I think I had really great conversations with you about many things which are not connected to computer science, like history and so on. So I think you are one of these people that could play such a role. So is there something like that in your plans for the future now that you're retired? And if not, what are your plans?
Go ahead.
And if not, what are your plans now that you are retired?
Okay.
Plans, I mean.
Well, my plans was to do a little bit more research, but I'm doing less, and I'm quite happy. I am involved in some research, not specific plans. I work with former PhD students, and we try to push some papers fairly slow. I have no plans for writing main books or major papers, but I would like to push forward what I presented today. So that's, I want to send quite soon, we want to send to a journal. And again, it's not an easy journal to get it published. Okay. So I don't have specific plans except for trying to publish this one.
Very good. So I think we have to wrap it up. It was really, really nice to have you here. Thanks a lot for the generosity of presenting this talk and enduring all the technical difficulties and answering the questions. I'm a great admirer of all the work you did with Ron. So it's very nice to have you here. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for organizing EROSS. It's a great thing.
Folks, thank you again, Yair. Folks, next week we're gonna continue with EROSS. And then with a talk where we're gonna have as a guest next week, again, always Wednesday, 4 o'clock Central European Summer Time, and this time as a presenter, we're gonna have my partner in crime, Enrico Franconi, presenting When Conceptual Modeling Meets Database. Enrico has been working for 35 years, I guess, on computational logics, on knowledge representation, on the foundations of database and AI and so on. I'm sure this is going to be a great talk. So I hope to see you all here again. Next week, we're going to start at 4 o'clock sharp, because now we found a universal hack to our problems. So in some way, we're going to start at 4 o'clock sharp. So hope to see you all here. And until then, stay safe. Thanks a lot again, Yair.
Oh, thank you very much.